Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's IMPLAN webinar for October. It is the top of the hour here. We're going to give it another minute or two to allow folks to keep joining us, and then we'll get started. Hello, everybody, and thank you again for joining us for today's IMPLAN's webinar. We're very excited about today's topic where we will be diving deeper into IMPLAN's data elements. Have you ever wondered how IMPLAN's data elements can empower both your economic impact studies and regional analyses? Well, in this session with IMPLAN's own Dr. Bjorn Markeson, you'll learn how to access, extract, and leverage IMPLAN's available data sets from the region details and data library sides of our application for your own use. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass the mic off for Bjorn. Take it away.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much. So I want to kind of go over a little bit about what we're going to talk about and learn today. And I want to first start off by saying, in addition to economic impact modeling capabilities, IMPLAN is a really rich source of regional economic data. So if you're only using IMPLAN for economic impact analysis, there's a lot more value that is available to you with your IMPLAN subscription. And these data that we're going to talk about today help you understand and can help you understand the context of economic impact analysis, as well as just inform you and any stakeholders about a deeper understanding of a particular region's economy. So what are we going to cover specifically today? We're going to talk about where to find regional data, specifically and primarily on industries and commodities in IMPLAN. Most of this is on the economic impact side of IMPLAN Cloud. Also, where to find satellite account information on occupations and the environment. This is both on the impact side and on the data library side. And then also how to access additional data such as trade flow or imputed census of employment and wages data via data library. One thing that I want to mention is that a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is also available in some way, shape, or form on our website, on our support site, support.implan.com. In particular, if you're looking at data elements, you can go to the particular data elements section, which is in our references data sources piece. And this goes through a number of ways to access our data elements, as well as showing and of having available a downloadable spreadsheet that walks through exactly how to look at and find different elements of IMPLAN's data and where you can find it, whether that be in the region details section of IMPLAN Cloud, in the results, if it's available in the results section of IMPLAN Cloud, or it's in data library. The other question is how to access this data. Again, some of this is available in data library, some of it's available in region details, and of the items that are available, a number of them are also now available via API. So what does that contain? So you can use API calls to pull data and access data from region details, as well as some elements of data library. We're adding more data to the API call opportunity all the time. So again, region details is included in any sort of impact software access to IMPLAN, so IMPLAN Cloud, where you're looking at economic impacts for a particular geographic region. You will have region details, and that data is available there. Data library, as many of you know, is an add-on product to IMPLAN that allows you to access a broader scope of data. So first, I'm going to start with an overview of what's available in terms of region details. And so region details is accessible in the regions section. And what we see here is you can access it in one of two ways. Once you select a region, you can choose View Region Details, the circle piece here. You can also click on the geographic region that you're looking at. So if we click on there, we can go to that section of the data, the region details. Now, one thing you can also do is all of the data that we are looking at today is downloadable for use. This is during the course of your subscription. To download a given data set, click on the 3 vertical dots in the upper right corner of the table you want to download, and then you can choose download and select your desired format. There's about 7 different formats for pulling this data, everything from Markdown to CSV files to JSON. So if you want to pull a CSV file that is unformatted, you can do that. Again, the tables that are available in IMPLAN are all downloadable in that way. So let's start with some of the study area data. What we're looking at here is a number of options to get a deeper understanding of what types of industries and commodities and underlying data are available for a particular region. So I've picked an individual county, and what I'm going to do is kind of walk through what's available in each of these tabs and why that might be useful for the work you're doing. So when we're looking at industry detail, what we see here are for a particular, so we're looking at an individual county, and what this is doing is in this county for an individual industry, say bread and bakery products, the bottom line, what is the total output? And then that gives us a sense of the overall output size for that industry, but also wage and salary employment, employee compensation, proprietor employment, proprietor income, and then what we often see is OPI and TOPI, other property income, which is generally profits, and then taxes on production and imports and net of subsidies. So we get a really kind of high level understanding of what we're seeing at an industry per industry level in a particular region. So understanding that mix of those industries in that area is available. Now, one thing you can also do if you want to look at these in terms of percentages, again, you go to those 3 vertical dots you can see in the upper right-hand corner, download it into a CSV file. It comes with the totals. You can turn that into a percentage. So you can look at, what did the total percentage of total output is bread and bakery products in Hennepin County. The next piece is looking at the industry summary. So in other words, this is a similar set of data. We're looking at total employment and total output, but also summarizing two of those additional pieces, the total intermediate inputs. So how much are they spending on other products that are going into production, total value add. Another way of thinking this is contribution to GDP, and then overall labor income. So if you want to know, not just, so often when we're looking at industries, we're interested in the size of the industry, and you can think of that in a couple different ways. You can think about that as number of jobs, right? Total job count. But jobs have different rates of pay, and so your labor income is not necessarily. So you can have a high employment industry with relatively low labor income. You can have high labor income with relatively low employment. Being able to see these on an industry by industry basis in the region helps you understand that regional context a little bit better. Another piece here are the region's household commodity demand. Essentially what this is looking at now is looking at the consumption patterns of household groups within the region. Now, I want to step back and say one thing about regions. What I'm looking at here is a county. And I can also do this for custom geographies. I can combine counties. I can say I want to know, I want to split the state of Colorado into 3 different portions. I want to put it in the Rockies, I want the Front Range, and I want the plains of eastern Colorado. I can do that, and then these values will be summarized for that portion of the geographic region. So I can mix and match those counties. I can build up custom regions. And that's really one of the advantages of using IMPLAN for this type of work, is that it builds those behind the scenes so that you can focus on looking at the analysis part of it. So what we're looking at here, again, household commodity demand. So we've split household groups into 9 different income groups. The furthest to the left, and you can't see it in the headline, is households making less than $15,000 a year, all the way over to the far right-hand side, which is households making more than $250,000 per year. And then it breaks down the total expenditures by industry type or by commodity type. How much are they spending on things like fruit, on beef, on greenhouse products? And so what this does is gives you an understanding of where those households are spending, what those outputs look like in terms of where are they spending that money on particular outputs for goods. And these are households in that region spending on these types of products or these types of commodities. One thing that's relatively new to IMPLAN, and I definitely wanted to highlight here, is for the county level data, you can dig into some demographic data. So we've got demographic detailed data in IMPLAN on the region detail side. And what this does is this summarizes data from a number of census related sources and puts it all in one place for the geographic region you're looking at, for the county you're looking at, right? So how many households are in each of the household groups, right? How many, what does housing tenancy look like, right? So we're looking at Hennepin County, basically 95% housing occupancy rate. And then we're looking at breakdowns of language spoken at home, race and ethnicity. And so really helps you put a socioeconomic context on the analysis you're doing. It's built out for that specific data year. And so you can use this data to have a better understanding of that regional context within IMPLAN without having to go to Census and pulling each of these individual tables independently. So again, a useful tool. It's in that region detail section under study area data that gives you a richer understanding of what the region you're looking at is composed of in a socioeconomic sense. Also, finally on this one, we're looking at industry averages. So what we look at is things like output per worker, labor income per worker, employee compensation per employee, same for proprietors, taxes per worker, and other property per worker. So in other words, we're looking at essentially a per worker or per employee breakdown of a lot of these pieces. So output per worker is essentially a way of thinking about productivity, how much output is being generated by a worker in a given industry. So we can see how that breaks down for a particular region. So in other words, how much output per worker in the bread and bakery products industry in Hennepin County. We're looking at about $184,000 of output per worker. How much labor income is being generated per worker? How much labor income is being spent per worker? We're looking at about $64,000. And again, giving this context for what an industry's structure looks like in terms of output rates, labor expenditures, taxes per worker, can give some color to any type of regional analysis you're looking at, including an economic impact analysis. So you have an understanding of, where's that output coming from in the region? Is the industry you're looking at producing a lot of output per worker? Does it have high labor income per worker, and so on and so forth? The next piece I want to look at is the social accounts reports. And again, like most of the pieces of that I'm looking at today, a lot of this is explained in detail in different parts of the support site, support.implan.com. So in here, if you go to references, methodology of IMPLAN, you get to an understanding IMPLAN social account reports. And what this does is this will go through every line item in essentially topic and heading in this section and explain what it is. So if you're looking at a particular table and you don't know what a particular statistic is referring to, I definitely encourage you to look in on that support site for clarification. So in the social accounts, if you're in your region details and you're looking at the top bar, we've got social accounts. And we're going to kind of go through a number of these, not all of them. But what this helps understand is a bit about the supply and value chains for a particular industry, and understanding how industries are interacting with one another. So in the study area data, we were looking at how industries exist in a region relative to other entities within that region. Here we're looking at relationships between those industries. So the first one I wanted to look at is the commodity summary tab. And what this is doing is lining out a number of pieces of information about specific commodities that are being produced in that region. So how much, again, bread and bakery products, line 93 is producing, we're looking at $260 million worth of that product, or that commodity, are being produced in the region by industry. The second one is institutional commodity production. How much of that is being produced by other institutions in that region? Generally, these are government-related entities. So in this case, 0 bread and bakery products are being produced. There is some production in the fluid and milk sector. And so we can add those together to get that total commodity supply. The next column is an interesting one, the local use of local supply. So what we're looking at here is the total commodity supply, and then subtract out from that foreign and domestic exports of commodity from the region. And so that's how much of that local supply is consumed locally. So if we're looking at the top line cheese, we're looking at $131 million in commodity production, but we're also looking at a large amount of export because only about $2 million of that remains for local use of local supply. So this really gives an understanding of how much local production is being used to support local industries and serve local consumers, right? So we get a richer understanding of that context. So is this an export industry? So in this case, the cheese industry is definitely an export industry. What are they exporting it to? We'll see that in a following table. The next step is commodity demand. So in other words, intermediate commodity demand is looking at how much cheese is demanded by other industries in the region. So we're looking at $106 million. There's institutional commodity demand. So institutional entities demand to consume cheese, and that gives us $187 million in total gross commodity demand. And finally, on that far right-hand side, we get a domestic supply to demand ratio. This is the percentage of local demand for the commodity that could possibly be met by local production. Doesn't mean that it is, but it just could possibly be met by local production. And it's calculated by dividing the total commodity supply less foreign exports by total gross commodity demand with a maximum of 100%. So again, having an understanding of how much demand is local, how much supply is local, and how those relate to one another. Here's one of the key pieces of how IMPLAN conducts economic impact analysis, looking at regional purchase coefficients and regional supply coefficients. So we're looking at what are these regional purchase coefficients and regional supply coefficients for given industries. So step back, what is a regional purchase coefficient? It's that proportion of local demand for a commodity that is currently met by local production. And so all industries and institutions are assumed to purchase that commodity locally at the same rate. So we have a regional purchase coefficient, and then a regional supply coefficient is the proportion of local supply of the commodity that goes to meet local demand. So in other words, we're getting some context as to how much of a particular product is likely sourced locally, and how much of a local product is likely sold locally as well. So again, when we're thinking about the context for regional economic activity, these are important to understand and to think about how those dollars are cycling through the local economy in terms of regional purchase of goods that are locally produced and regional supply to local consumers. And this is when I was mentioning trade previously, this is what we were getting to. And another kind of key data element that may have external uses is looking at exports. And we think about exports in two key ways. One is domestic exports. So that's not, and then foreign exports. So usually when we think of exports, we're thinking about exports to a foreign country. Shipping U.S. cheese to a foreign nation for consumption there. But that's only one kind of export, right? So we're thinking about this economy as a small regional economy or a constrained geographic region. And so anything exporting out of Hennepin County would be an export. And you could think of that as either domestic exports to other parts of the United States or foreign exports outside of the country as a whole. So those first two columns are how much is exported from either industry or institutions, and then where those go in terms of either the rest of the country or outside of the country as a whole. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're thinking about those domestic exports, where do they go? We'll talk about that a little bit later in this webinar when we talk about US trade flow data. We do have a modeled estimate of where those domestic exports go. So if you want to know where does that $126 million of cheese go from Hennepin County, we can take a look at that. A couple more pieces here before we move on. We're looking at industry commodity production. So again, if we're looking at that bread and bakery product, and I want to know, where does that go? What do they produce? They're producing a number of different items, right? So the commodity production column is the output value of each of the commodities produced by this industry. So, and then the byproduct coefficient is the proportion of that industry's total industry output dedicated to each commodity. So what does the bread and bakery product sector make? Well, the vast majority of what they make are bread and bakery products. So 95%, in fact. But they do make a number of other items as well. They make some cookies and crackers at about 2%. 0.5% of what they're doing is our confectionaries from purchased chocolate. So candy, non-chocolate candy. And so that's giving us an idea of how does what this industry produce break down into other commodities, right? So we don't have an exact one-to-one relationship between industries and commodities. Industries can produce multiple things. And the way we break that down into other types of commodities is via that byproduct coefficient. And then regional market share is the proportion of commodity production that is produced in this particular industry. If there's more than one producer of the commodity, that's going to be less than 100%, right? So in other words, what percentage of each of these products is being made by this industry sector in this region? And so even though confectionaries from purchased chocolate is a very small proportion of what the bread and bakery product industry makes, it's still looking at about 13% of that regional market share, suggesting that there aren't necessarily a lot of other entities that are making confectionaries from purchased chocolate in Hennepin County. This is one of my favorite tables in IMPLAN. What we're looking at here are the industry commodity demand for an industry. What is this industry spending its money on in terms of production? So bread and bakery products, what do they need? What do they spend their inputs on? That's their gross inputs. So flour, management, grain, wholesale services. Those are the big inputs. Now, the question is, what percentage of those inputs are sourced locally? That's the regional purchase coefficient. So this table is really useful if you're looking at understanding why a regional multiplier varies from region to region, because those regional purchase coefficients are going to be different. The capacity to buy particular inputs within that region changes. And as you change the scope of that region, that RPC will change as well. So we're looking at Hennepin County, the RPC for flour is going to be relatively low. As we expand that to the state of Minnesota, that regional purchase coefficient will likely increase. So this is one way of thinking about this is one step behind the multiplier, right? So what is the multiplier, the regional multiplier for bread and bakery products? It's some value, say 1.8. And why is it that particular value? Why isn't it higher? Well, the RPCs are lower. And so if you're thinking about how does one increase the number of times dollars cycle through the local economy, we're going to think about what inputs are low in terms of regional purchase coefficient that perhaps through some sort of local economic development activity can be increased. Again, this is really useful for understanding, getting a deeper understanding of why you're getting the results you're getting in an economic impact analysis. And then finally, one of these pieces is value added. So in other words, what we're looking at are breakdowns for this industry, not intermediate inputs, but what are their expenses on employee compensation as a percent, as a total percentage of their output. Proprietor income, other property income, taxes on production, net of subsidies. Again, you can look at these at that industry level in the region to get an idea of, what is the bread and bakery product industry generating in terms of taxes on production and net forest facilities. So we're looking at about $6 million in this case. I'm going to cruise through this next one pretty quick, but we're looking at industry demand. This is looking at, for a particular industry, what is the demand? Where are their products going within the region? So bread and bakery products are going as inputs to other industries, frozen cakes, bread and bakery products. They're also being shipped via air, water, and truck transportation. And then they're being consumed in entities such as elementary and secondary schools, colleges and universities, hospitals, nursing facilities. So where are these products going? They're going as inputs, they're being shipped out of the region, and they are being consumed, in this case, is at schools and hospitals as a part of their expenditure structure. And again, what we're looking at here is that RPC, which is the same for all of these industries, and then that the gross inputs expenditure and the regional inputs expenditure. How much of that is local? How much of that is in total? The other thing I wanted to mention is, in all of these cases, what we're essentially looking at are ways of kind of piecing out parts of the social accounting matrix. And you can export that social accounting matrix in whole, right, in detail. I'm not going to walk through how to do that. It's a drop-down option. You can export that SAM in detail. If you want to turn that into an Excel spreadsheet, you can do that as well. So exporting the SAM in detail, very straightforward within the IMPLAN. If you want to use that for other external applications. Also, we do have the capacity now to export from IMPLAN into GAMS. So a number of folks that do CGE modeling use a GAMS file structure for that. We have one, and we'll soon have a second option for that. Again, you can export the data directly from IMPLAN into that GAMS format for use outside of the software in other modeling applications. Also, I wanted to mention, if you're relatively new to IMPLAN, you may not have seen, or if you've been with us for a while and haven't gone into the region details in some time, we also have two new, or relatively new, satellite accounts, occupation data and environmental data. So the occupation data, what this is doing is giving us an understanding of regional data, regional occupation data within a particular county. So digging into this in terms of specific occupations, what are the employment count, what is the pay, and then what are location quotients for that. In other words, we're looking at Hennepin County, we're looking at ranking of wage and salary employment. Registered nurses, yes, there's 20,000 of them, but that's approximately one, a location quotient of 1. So fairly common average amount of employment in that sector relative to the nation as a whole. We can look at software developers is a 1.7, so a little bit higher. So it gives you a contextual understanding of how common a particular occupation is relative to its frequency in the US as a whole, or share of the US as a whole. We can dig into the details on this as well for a particular industry, breaking down the bread and bakery products industry into occupational types. It's not just one occupation type, right? So this is useful for telling that contextual story about an industry. Another way of thinking about this is if you're looking at a software firm that's going to employ 50 individuals, that's not 50 software developers, software engineers, right? Maybe that's 5 or 10 software engineers and 40 other types of occupations. This will help break that down and tell that story about what types of jobs you should be expecting to look at. Occupation data also shows up in the detail in the results section of IMPLAN. So rather than just sitting on an individual employment number, you can break that down into occupational types. This is the most detailed option for that. You can roll that up as well, basically aggregate it up to a less detailed option. Also, there's core competency data. So we can get into a number of options in terms of looking at abilities, knowledge, skill, education required, work experience required, and on-the-job training required in two different ways. One, well, three different ways actually. One, at the regional level, what is the regional mix of these competency frequency competencies? What is the frequency of these competencies within a particular occupation and also within a particular industry? Again, extensive detail on how to use and interpret occupation data on our support site, as well as on the environmental side. Looking at this, we can look at environmental details for a particular industry in this region. So what is the bread and bakery product doing in terms of production of greenhouse gases, right? So we're looking at where is this data coming from? This is from the EPA's environmentally extended input-output model. We have a ratio of units of carbon dioxide emitted per dollar of output. We multiply it by that output value to give estimates of environmental output in the region. That kind of covers what I wanted to talk about in the region details section. I do want to talk about data library. And what data library really has going for is the capacity to visualize a lot of this data. So if I want to look at foreign exports of grain, and I want to look at it over a broader scope of regions, I can do that. So let's say I have the Minnesota State Plan for economic impact analysis. Well, and also the data library. My data library scope is for the US as a whole. So I can put that analysis in a broader regional context. So looking at foreign exports of grain, we can look at this in terms of what counties are they coming from in that region. We can look at year-over-year trends. So by state, how does that trend? There's a lot of different options of how you can mix and match this. So if I want to look at local demand for electronic computers on the Pacific Coast, I can look at that. Where does that? Well, most of that is coming from California. I can see those trends over time. So I can see how that rises and falls in different contexts. I can look at that geographically in terms of where those are being consumed. Also, that occupational data that we mentioned in earlier is here as well. So I can look at bookkeeping and accounting as an occupation type and look at what are those skills and abilities associated with that industry, right? What do we need to have available in the labor force in order to fill these types of positions? We need mathematical reasoning, number facility, problem sensitivity, inductive reasoning. Some of these are pretty common to all of them. Oral and written comprehension are usually near the top of pretty much any occupation, as well as near vision. But once you get off those top three, you're really getting into the specific needs of that occupation. Regional demographic data is here. We already mentioned this, but again, this is a more visual opportunity to look at it. Also, county-to-county trade, right? So if we wanted to look at motor vehicle seating produced in Indiana, where does it go? You know, I was looking at production facilities in Ohio and Michigan, and I was noticing that almost all of the seating was coming from Elkhart, Indiana. Well, so I looked at the state of Indiana. Where is this seating going, right? So Indiana is producing automobile seating that gets shipped all over the country for production. So this is how it's tied to that broader national supply chain. And again, you can extract this data, right? So you can pull this data in a table format. I want to know all of the counties where this trade occurs to and from. You can pull that out of data library. You can look at this in another visual context. Here we're looking at county-to-county traded particle board from Beltrami County, Minnesota. Where does it go? Well, it goes to Minneapolis and Chicago. not surprising because of their close proximity, and then major building centers across the US, as well as the Los Angeles area. If you want to know how we build this data, there was another webinar I did a few months ago that looked at how exactly we build this trade flow data. And we also have a white paper on our website that explains our methodology. And again, these data are extractable via data library. Another key piece of information is the Census of Employment and Wages. So as many of you may know, CEW data, and this is annual CEW data, is often suppressed at the county level in rural regions. And so we need data to be essentially complete. So we've imputed values for this. So you can look at and say, I want to know in Berks County, Pennsylvania, what does employment look like, and average annual wages per wage and salary employee, how does that look? And you can pull it out. If you wanted to know which of these are imputed and which ones are original, you can choose this disclosure option, right? And I can say, I just want the non-imputed values, or I want just the imputed values. Again, our methodology for how we do this imputation is available on our website. You can also kind of customize some of these options, right? So let's say I wanted a panel of storage battery production at the county level in the US in 2022 dollars, and I wanted it every 5 years, right? 2001, 2006, 2011, 16, 21. I can do that, right? I can set up the filters, I can pick that NAICS code, and then get that table for where that's being produced, and the employment for that, establishment counts in those regions, and wages as well. Again, all of this data is extractable out of the IMPLAN Data Library. Tax data is also here. So we have tax level data. This one is showing state level. So state level taxes in Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and allows us to line up and make comparisons across regions. So in other words, we're looking at taxes on amusement licenses are 0 in Georgia, 100,000 in North Carolina, 6 million in South Carolina. So the way a state taxes and levies taxes varies significantly. And so this helps tease out those differences in that data. So we can also look at this at the county level, but this really breaks down those taxes by type, right? So no death and gift tax in Georgia or South Carolina, a minor one in North Carolina. Again, digging into the data, we can pull this tax data out of data library, use it external software, use it to explore a region and get a better idea of what that tax context looks like for a particular region. The last thing I wanted to mention here, we do have one option. There's also our local areas region industry compare piece. And what this allows you to do is kind of compare a set of different values between multiple regions. So if I want to look at light truck and SUV manufacturing in Wayne County, Michigan, and Lucas County, Ohio, I can do that, right? So I pick 2 different regions, same industry. I can mix and match that however I want, and then look at those some key pieces. You know, what does that 3-year growth rate look like? What does labor income look like in comparison one to the other? What are those employment values? How do those line up? What does output per worker look like? What does value added per worker look like? And then on the bottom, we also have location quotients for that and shift share options as well. But again, allowing you to make those contextual comparisons between regions, between industries, to give a richer context to any type of analysis you're doing using regional economic data. So that sums up kind of what I wanted to walk through. I know it's a real cook's tour of the data in IMPLAN. I do encourage you to dive in and explore both data library and the region detail section. And thank you very much. Michael, did we have any questions in the chat?
Hey, Bjorn. Yeah, we had a few pop up, so I will answer one of these live. So we had a question for you, Bjorn. Is total employment a headcount measure or an employment rather than jobs? And the answer to that question is that first and foremost, remember that IMPLAN, when you see total employment, that's going to be the sum of both wage and salary employment as well as proprietor employment. Thinking definitively about what employment is in IMPLAN, that is going to be an industry-specific mix of full-time, part-time, and seasonal employment. So that's essentially an annual average that will account for seasonality following the same definitions used by the BLS and the BEA. Another important note, IMPLAN employment is not something we can equate to full-time equivalent. So they do not necessarily represent individual jobs. Great question there.
Just to add to that, Michael, we do have, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have a converter that allows you to convert those employment values to FTEs, correct?
That is correct, Bjorn. That is also, like many things, available on our support site.
Excellent. I think we booked this for 45 minutes. Unless there were any other pressing questions, Michael, I can follow up with those offline.
I don't think so. Yeah, we will do that. Thank you so much, Bjorn.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your week.